Um, so welcome to the Technical Advisory Council meeting for today for Linux Foundation Public Health. First, to get started, we have our antitrust policy notice, basically saying that that we're meeting together to participate with possible competitors, and that we are following the antitrust and competition laws, and that we stick with agendas and don't invoke anything that could turn into antitrust. Um, we also have a code of conduct. If you have not read it, please read it. By being here, you agree to the code of conduct, uh, or by speaking up and participating, you agree to the code of conduct. Um, we have our list of technical advisors for our variety of companies and projects. And with that, the agenda is pretty open at the moment. So if there's anything people would like to add to the agenda, you should have right access to the meeting, to the meeting notes. So feel free to add something onto that. There are no chair notes for today. Do we have any public health authorities that are here that would like to discuss any topics?
I do not see any today.
Neither do I. So let's jump into this particular topic then. We have a little bit more than 5 minutes that we can spend if you all like. So just as a heads up, the White House is issued a new, sorry, I need to get rid of the zero. The White House has issued a new cybersecurity executive order. The basic idea behind it is, due to the variety of breaches that we've had, the three that they called out were the SolarWinds breach, which was a supply chain attack. We had the Outlook breach, which occurred, or I think it was Exchange, for Microsoft Exchange, and then we had the recent pipeline attack. The United States is putting together, through the Office of the White House, a set of requirements and guidelines for all software that is going to be accepted by a variety of contracts and the way that they develop software internally as well. And so the thing with this is, while I'm not expecting this to have any implication short term with our engagements with the public health authorities, and certainly it doesn't apply to nations that are not the United States. I do expect that many of the states will adopt the federal standard. So what tends to happen is the federal government will put out some statement like this, and then in the financial incentives for receiving money or for funding, they will then add in additional stipulations over time. So I would expect to see these same standards be requirements in future things for states to continue to receive funding in a variety of incentivized areas. And part of that will very likely be for each of the states to adopt some form of alignment with the standards that they're putting on. There's several requirements that are there. The ones that I wanted to highlight out is that there's going to be more strict requirements on threat sharing and breach notifications. So people focus on breach notifications. Generally, if you have PII or PHI over a certain size, you have to notify parties. And in terms of the breach notifications, those are the ones that people tend to focus on. There's this really interesting thing called threat sharing, though. What threat sharing is you have companies will look at trends. They might see more of a certain activity occurring on the dark web, or they might see certain types of denial of service attacks and similar. And they'll then share this information with each other to say, hey, we've seen DNS amplification attacks come in from this region. And by sharing that information, then it gives other companies the ability to actively defend against such attacks. So they're looking at increasing the quantity of threat sharing that's going on. They explicitly called zero trust out in their environments. And they also explicitly called out security-oriented software development processes. So this is things like what things do you put in place in your actual processes and your design and your architecture, requirements gathering, and so on through the entire life cycle to ensure that you're following secure practices. I don't know how much of impact this will have on us internally, but they do intend to apply some of these controls towards open source projects and products. I highly recommend that we engage with some of the other communities in Linux Foundation over this. There's two groups that we can contact at the minimum. The first one is there's a Linux Foundation security software security group or security foundation that exists, and I'll go grab their URL and stick it into the slide later on as well. There's also the CNCF SIG security, or now they call them TAG, Technical Advisory Group security, that advises all of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation on how to secure their software, and they help identify threats and best practices. So they're actively focusing on many of these topics. And so instead of going out by ourselves and saying, how do we develop a secure stance, as time goes on, if we get hit with these requirements, then we should look to work with them on some of these things. The area that we're most likely to see is what's called a software bill of materials. It's a fancy term for a human and machine readable list of software libraries, dependencies, and where they came from. So most of the initial things are aiming towards preventing supply chain attacks. So the software bill of materials will become a major focus. Some security experts have dubbed next week as bring your software bill of materials to work day or to work week, because you're going to see a lot of this in conversations pretty soon. Uh, for us, if we right now, it's probably still a little bit early for us to give significant guidance on this, but we should consider that as projects start to mature, that we start to look at how can we ensure that we meet these standards, especially when we start to see U.S. states start to adopt, which then will impact the public health authorities directly. And so some of the things we can look at are, as time progresses, is the possibility of pulling in a standards-based software bill of materials format. There's two popular formats that are out there, and we can see whether or not they would add. There's two parts to it. One of them is, does it meet the requirements? But the second part is, what is the complexity that it would add to the developers and projects as well? Because we don't want to push things to products that have limited functionality and end up complicating the whole system. So we need to look at it from both aspects. Some of the other things that are coming out are SigStore. So SigStore allows you to basically notarize software that you publish. So as a developer, you would have a key that you would create for a short period of time, over a few minutes. You would then sign your software with it, effectively countersigned by a ledger, and then that becomes public information. So you're able to then look at, as a consumer, you can ask the question: Does this package come from a person or company or community that I trust? And Sigstore becomes the central location that you can look to validate that your software has not been modified or tampered with in the process of getting to you. And this is also to counter things like GitHub supply chain attacks, such as, what if GitHub is compromised? What if the repository that you store your tarballs in is compromised? So these provide a way to counter and mitigate those types of attacks. We also have the Cloud Native Computing Foundation's SPIFFE standard for running processes where every workload receives a cryptographic identity. This one's definitely more heavyweight than the previous two, but it provides a path towards every workload receiving a cryptographic identity that it can use to validate itself. In the same way you have like your username and password, and maybe in some scenarios even a software token that you use to log into to a website. It provides a similar thing to workloads, where when a workload connects to another workload, it has a a cryptographic identity that it's able to present to the thing it's connecting to, so that both the client and the server cryptographically validate each other, and they can then pull their identities off of those cryptographic certificates. So you're not saying uh, here's a long living token. Instead, you're saying here's something very short-lived that I can cryptographically tie to whatever I'm connecting. And also to also encourage, when it makes sense to do so, a multi-factor authentication for the products that we're using. So if there's a dashboard that people are logging into that has sensitive data, or there's an administrative page that we recommend the inclusion of things such as FIDO universal two-factor authentications, which are basically like, if you've heard of YubiKey or Titan keys, it's basically like a little hardware device that with a button on it, and when you log in, there's one right there being shown by. Can you show them again? Yeah, see right. Right there, you can see him holding it up. And so basically you click the button, it connects in through Bluetooth or through USB to the through your web browser to log you in. So it means that even if your password is compromised, that the attacker cannot gain access to the system because they don't have the physical hardware key. So these are uh, so so we in short, we're going to start to see these type of things arise through those requirements. I've linked the full executive order, which is really long. They have a decent definition for zero trust that I recommend you look at if you're interested in that. And I also included the fact sheet, which is a summarization of what the order means in a much more readable format. So in short, that I'm not saying that these are required at the moment, but these type of things we want to watch, because in time we start to see these trends appear, and they they're a sign of things to come, and where we see regulation heading towards for areas such as healthcare. And to add to that, just as a prelude to all of this, when Anthem uh, was compromised and they had their security breach, the settlement agreement that they settled with several of the states explicitly called zero trust to be has a requirement within their infrastructure. And as we see in here, we're starting to see zero trust appear as well. So you can actually look at some of the things that the state attorney is starting to require, or the things that the auditors are starting to require, that they already started to come up. And this is a advancement of that. And within the next 3 to 6 months, we'll see more requirements and more advancements come up as well. And we'll start to see them trickle down to the states, and potentially down to the actual policy in terms of how much a company would be liable for if there's a breach. Like if they implemented zero trust, then they may end up with a reduction, or if they did not, and then they would end up being considered a higher risk and would have to pay a higher fine or something similar. So don't be surprised if you see something like that occur later. In short, I know this is a lot to take in, but are there any questions on this particular topic? Not hearing anything at the moment, so.
I do have one question, which is, are we seeing anything, do you know if we're seeing anything similar from other countries? Or is this,
That's
I mean, obviously this is a US specific policy, but do we know anything about what's happening internationally?
That's a good question. I haven't heard of other countries doing anything internationally just yet. It would not surprise me if we started to see the EU follow suit, though, because what happens is that this is going to be considered to be best practice in the near future. And the way that the policies tend to be written is you're to secure your systems using best practices. So if the best practice shifts from perimeter defense, which is the best practice today, to zero trust, and then we'll see that take effect across the world through policy, even if there's zero change in the verbiage of the laws. and the policies that are written towards them. So so even though it's not explicitly called out in places like the EU, it would not surprise me if you started to see these things come in shortly afterwards.
Yeah, Jenny, I just had a call earlier today with some privacy folks in Canada. Like they were saying that it's likely that Canada will follow suit.
Yeah, so even though we're not seeing anything from other countries just yet in Europe or similar, highly likely we'll see them come up in the near future. It won't be instant. It'll probably be an order of months, but uh, they're I guess a blunt way to put it is these countries are just one pipeline or one electric grid away from seeing something like this happen. And one of the things that we're seeing as well is the LF Energy is also looking at some of this stuff as well because they have similar requirements. And the big group that they're working with is the French electrical grid. And they're looking at some of these zero trust methodologies as well at the company level over there. And what ends up happening is that those companies will also bubble up to the auditors and to the policymakers what they're doing as best practices because they want to solidify their approach as a best practice as part of the path because then it further reduces the total risk to them. So we are seeing we're already seeing because of the pipeline breach that occurred with Colonial, where we're seeing other adjacent companies in that space take up similar things, and it acted as a catalyst. Like this stuff was going to come out anyway; it's just a matter of when, and the pipeline acted as a catalyst towards these policies being released. So I'm not hearing any other questions, so people may be on mute if there are any. But if not, then in terms of the agenda, that was pretty much it. Are there any other topics that people would like to discuss, or should we yield back time?
Is there like an LF security?
There is, and let me pull up two areas. So we have Linux Foundation security, and there's also CNCF security. They were recently named it from SIG to TAG, so I'll add both of these to the uh, to the list. And there's a couple others as well that are important. Um, so that's one of them, and then the other one, and I'll fix the formatting in a few moments or after the meeting. So it's Open Source Security Foundation is one of the groups. We have this is the Kubernetes-based group or the cloud native group, SIG Security, and they have weekly meetings they're talking about these exact topics on a weekly basis, and they have a Slack channel that you can join if you're interested in that. And that one I'll post here. And the other one that's important in this is SigStore. And SigStore is another Linux Foundation, which is aiming specifically on software signing and transparency of who produced that piece of software and who signed the software. So basically provenance of that to prevent supply chain attacks. And the last one I'll post those here, and I'll fix the formatting on this pretty soon. But those are the three, or four rather. If you want to get involved, the group I would recommend starting with first is probably CNCF TAG Security, and they're the most active in this space that I know of, and they can lead you into SigStore or Security Foundation, which is these are all Linux Foundation.
Awesome. Thank you.
My pleasure.